Hello and welcome to Fit to Speak. I'm Eugene Oba. So glad to have you with us. In the June edition of the program, I said this. Well, folks, the dark clouds of the novel coronavirus pandemic seem to be dissipating in the U.S., but the Delta variant and all kinds of other variants are saying, not so fast. What is coming around the corner, though, is the Tokyo Olympics, and with all the drama surrounding that, along with everything else that's going on in the sports world, I speak with journalist Marcus Dowling, who will help make sense of it all in a few minutes. But first, as the NBA Finals recently came to an end with the Milwaukee Bucks winning their first championship in 50 years, and a move that so many people, myself included, saw coming earlier this month, Maria Taylor will be leaving ESPN after talks on a new contract reached an impasse. Now, contract disputes are not particularly unique in this media business, except for the backdrop on which this occurred. Nonetheless, Maria stated, quote, "So thankful to Jimmy and all of my great teammates and friends at the SEC Network, College Game Day, women's and men's college basketball, and the NBA Countdown family. The people who believed in me, encouraged me, pushed me, and lifted me up. Words are inadequate to express my boundless appreciation, and I hope to make them proud." The Jimmy she's referring to is ESPN chairman Jimmy Pitaro, who in his statement acknowledged Maria's successes and work ethic, that the network would miss her, and went on to say in part, quote, "We remain determined to continue to build a deep and skilled talent roster that thoroughly reflects the athletes we cover and the fans we serve. While she chose to pursue a new opportunity, we are proud of the work we've done together." That new opportunity is widely speculated to be with NBC Sports, particularly the impending Tokyo Olympics. I would say that no matter where Maria Taylor ends up, I've got a feeling that she's going to be all right. As I stated earlier, you are going to get Marcus Dowling's take on the situation that surrounded Rachel Nichols and Maria Taylor later in the show. And I want you to do me a favor and subscribe and ring the bell on our YouTube channel, because we will keep an eye on this and bring you any updates in future editions of this program. The World Anti-Doping Agency are a bunch of dopes. You see, earlier in July, Sha'Carri Richardson was banned for testing positive for the use of marijuana during the Olympic trials in June. She was slated to compete in the 100 meters, but she could still compete in the 4x100 meter relay, except that's no longer happening. Now, keep in mind that her use of marijuana was in Oregon, where it's fully legalized. This has been truly a huge story, so much so that U.S. Representatives Jamie Raskin of Maryland and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York wrote a letter to the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency, which instituted Sha'Carri's one-month ban. In response, the agency said, as they are under the World Agency, that essentially, we don't make the rules, we just enforce them. But they did note that they will, quote, "continue to advocate for rule changes which would better address tragic situations like Miss Richardson's." I think what's happened here to Sha'Carri has been truly a tragic situation indeed. And I think it's a microcosm of all the ills that has been happening and continue to happen here in the United States, especially the failed war on drugs that started 50 years ago. And by the way, here in these United States, 18-year-olds can go and fight in war, one of which the late Donald Rumsfeld was an architect of, but they cannot have a beer to celebrate coming out alive. I think something's definitely wrong with that picture. Folks, our policies have got to change, but don't expect that from the current president. I wouldn't hold my breath on that one. And as the Delta variant becomes the dominant strain of the novel coronavirus, every person in Maryland who died from COVID in June were unvaccinated. 100%. Again, 100% of the folks in Maryland who died from COVID in June were unvaccinated. They were unvaccinated. It's crazy to me. The COVID deniers are busy bumblebees pollinating the populace with their lies, and we cannot have that happen. We cannot let these people dominate the narrative. As a matter of fact, I actually enjoyed this from Steve Edwards, the CEO of Cox Health in Missouri, stating, quote, "If you are making wildly disparaging comments about the vaccine and have no public health expertise, you may be responsible for somebody else's death. Shut up." couldn't have said it better myself, though I will say my language will have been a little bit saltier. And joining me now is Marcus Dowling, journalist, media entrepreneur, and cultural creative. Marcus, welcome to the program. It is nice
Thank
to
you for
have you
having
on.
me, Eugene. I'm glad to be here. I truly appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, Marcus. It is really always good to have you on our program. And let's go ahead and get started here with some of this
Do it.
wild news that's been going on over these last few weeks as we get very, very close now to the Olympics. But before I even talk about the Olympics, especially in the broad strokes, I want to start from the jump here and talking
Okay.
about Sha'Carri Richardson and
By all
the
means,
situation
by all
about.
means.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as we know, sadly, she is not going to be competing in Tokyo this year. We know all of what has been happening. I've been mentioning this. In fact, I mentioned this in my commentary earlier in the show. But what have you made of these developments, Marcus? And what does it say about America as a whole?
It says that the letter of our law does not meet the tenor of our times. This has always been an issue in America, and more so now that issues revolving around race and gender are at the forefront of the social conversation in the country. We've always been able, because of the fact that the conversation's been defined by white men for generations, that when issues involving black men or black women or people of color of any color are involved, and also when non-men are involved, cisgender men are involved in the conversation, then it gets to be a difficult place because the nation, in and of itself, was largely not built to sustain anybody other than white men, because there's 37 of them that ratified the Constitution in 1787, to define the conversation. So that makes it very difficult.
It's challenging, isn't it? You
Yeah.
know, especially now, and I guess we are in this we're in the post-Trump era. And
Yes.
when we talk in the context of sports, it has kind of been, especially during that era, as kind of this whole, stick to sports, that sort of thing, et cetera, without, realizing that the sports and politics and race and the culture are all kind of sort of intertwined. And you talk about that, in a little bit in your article that you did
Yes.
for Medium. So tell us more about that, because when I read it, and you made some quite a connection here. Tell us more about
Yes.
that.
So I wrote this piece for Medium called "Sha'Carri Goddamn," which is directly taken from Nina Simone's 1964 single "Mississippi Goddamn," which ultimately led to her being blacklisted as a musical artist in America, and she had to spend most of the rest of her life traveling globally in order to achieve any sort of acclaim and sustainability. So similarly, I find Sha'Carri Richardson's situation to be blackballing in a sense, in the notion that she is banned for doing something that is essentially legal by the United States Olympic Committee. She was found to be to test positive for marijuana use, and she used marijuana in a state in which marijuana is legal, in a manner in which it is legal. But for the private entity, the USOC, for which she was competing in the United States Olympic trials, the idea of athletes using marijuana when, of course, they use all sorts of other performance enhancing drugs and have for the test of time, especially in this nation at this time, given that she's an African American female as well. It just makes it incredibly difficult to see it as anything other than blacklisting at that point. And there's an analog right there with Nina Simone as well.
And what I don't get, Marcus, is um, marijuana as a performance enhancing drug. I think that it was Seth Rogen who said recently, relatively recently, that if something to the effect of if marijuana is a performance enhancing drug, then he might as well be Flojo at
Right.
that point. I
Of
mean,
course, it's
it,
completely absurd to say that someone using marijuana recreationally as a decompressant, in the sense that she had just found out that her biological mother, she was an adopted child, her biological mother died, and she was told this in an interview prior to the Olympic trials. So in the midst of this high stress, abnormally high pressure situation, understand that most athletes who are Olympic athletes only get one chance every 4 years to achieve success that must sustain them for 4, 8, 12 years, sometimes the rest of their lives. An Olympic gold medalist, you could be an Olympic gold medalist and have like a solid career for the rest of your existence. You could be like Bruce Jenner and literally never have to do anything else but be Olympic gold medalist Bruce Jenner. Or Carl Lewis, we what 8-time gold medalist winning Carl Lewis, and you're literally paid and you're able to achieve sustainable wealth by that level of success that happens once every 4 years. So to find out that your biological mother died prior to the Olympic trials, and this is she's at peak athletic, performance, age, skill, physique, power, whatever. Like she's like across the board, endurance. Like she's ready to go. She is ideally suited to be the gold medal winning 100-meter, runner at the Olympics. That is a marquee prestige event, and she is ideally going to be the gold medalist. And then she finds out that her biological mother died, and she wants to smoke pot in order to calm down prior to the most important 4 runs of her entire career. And to say that she can't do that is insane at best.
I think I mentioned this in my commentary that the world agency that is responsible for setting the rules,
Right.
and all of this, that there really are, in my view, a bunch of dopes. I think that again, it's just a shame what has happened. I mean, her story has been very compelling, um, and the fact that we're not going to see her in this Olympics, as you said, she's going to have to wait, until 2024 to compete. The fact that we're not going to see her now, again, what do you see here, Marcus? What impact is that going to have on that event? Really in this whole track and field, and really this entire Olympics.
Okay, so this actually gets into something we'll talk about a little bit later, so we'll circle back to this for sure. So put a pin in this one, we'll circle back. The notion that the International Olympic Committee receives 90% of their revenue from the broadcast rights to the Olympic Games. That's 90% of their revenue from the broadcast rights to the Olympic Games. Sha'Carri Richardson running in the women's 100-meter race and also running in the 4x100-meter relay, that creates an immediate ratings boost. That creates a moment for all of the advertisers and the advertising rights, that are tied into the Olympic Games, which are broadcast, almost nonstop across like 6 different broadcast networks in the NBC Universal family, including, like streaming portals and online spaces as well, and also via YouTube and across the board. Like there's all these great marketing opportunities there. And if Sha'Carri Richardson is not running, then why would you want to watch it 100 meters? I don't care if a woman ran the 100-meter in a faster time than Ben Johnson. Nobody cares. Like it's not a marquee moment. Like it's just not. And it's a sad thing about Title IX and women's sports or whatever you want to say, but people just aren't going to care. And especially now that there's an invective to say, well, we're going to boycott anybody else watching the 100 meters because this egregious travesty of justice has occurred.
You just mentioned earlier on, the costs
Yes.
really of these games, and I think it's very important that we really talk about this because, of course, as we know, and I'm just going to combine some of this stuff here, we know that there was a lot of opposition from the public in Japan to even holding these
Yes.
games. And
Well,
the
vaccination
COVID.
rate is something around like 20 or 30% over there
Yeah,
of the
which is not
population.
great, at all. I mean, there's a lot of issues there, in terms of, the rollouts and everything else. But 20, 30% of the public vaccinated, is not great. And then, of course, they've recently declared state of emergency um, over there in Japan. So as a result, the games are not going to be held with spectators. And then I go back to Bob Costas's recent appearance, well, relatively recent appearance on Real Time with Bill Maher, and he
Yeah,
called for the games to be postponed. But obviously, that is not going to happen. We're on the eve of this Olympics. It's not going to
right.
happen. That ship has sailed. Then you've got NBC, which is the biggest rights holder to the games,
Yes,
$7.75 billion. So they have those reasons as to why they would want to have the
of
stuff
course,
stick around,
of
and
course,
all that.
questionably.
So the question, Marcus, is: Are the corporate interests being placed ahead of the human interest as we head into
A
these games?
1000%. I mean, they held an entire NBA season in a bubble. They played National Football League games in almost completely empty stadiums. The Super Bowl being played in a one-third filled stadium was almost laughable and unprovable. And people sitting in pods watching the big game, and the weekend's performance where he comes in from the top of Raymond James Stadium and is running through a maze of like in the seats, like what is that? But it's ultimately because there's so much corporate finance that is tied into professional athletics, because it's the one thing. And if you look at broadcasting across the board, like cord cutting has is a disaster for terrestrial broadcast titans. So NBC Universal, for instance, like you look at cord cutting for them, and they had to come up with Peacock in order to like basically like put a band-aid on the bleeding at the start of the pandemic. So ultimately, at this point, the Olympics have to fall in line, because, well, if the NBA and the NFL are these, like titans of industry as far as the marketing and the rights value, then the Olympics, which is not even close to what the NFL is, they're they're going to do exactly what everybody else did. I mean, even if you look at it globally, like Premiership and the Bundesliga and all these other like large globally impacting leagues worldwide, all played their seasons, all because of the marketing dollars, all because they're solely tied to that. We're in such a place with the economy worldwide where the idea that people paying their money to pay for tickets to watch a game, or people buying merchandise or any other kind of commerce, pales by comparison to the commerce that comes from rights holders and corporate interests and investors. And you have to do the games in that case. You just do. Like there's no nice way to put it.
And what's interesting about that, Marcus, is that you had Bob Costas, who also said something very interesting here. Quote that all of the contracts are written in favor of the IOC. That if the Olympics are held, that all the losses, all the cost overruns, they fall on the Olympic Organizing Committee of Tokyo. None of that is borne by the IOC. Plus, if the games take place and NBC televises them, then the IOC collects every last penny of the broadcast rights. So you can't expect them to have the same view as everyone else. So that's a pretty interesting stuff in and of itself, isn't it? Insofar
It's
as
the same thing with like, so I've worked in the wrestling industry for like 20 years. And WrestleMania, for instance, right, is a thing that's like a sold show. So like a municipality could purchase a show in March from World Wrestling Entertainment that will be, will include every single star that wrestling's ever had, from Hulk Hogan to Mick Foley to The Rock to Stone Cold Steve Austin to Roman Reigns and whomever. They'll all be there. But WWE doesn't take any of the cost. The municipality of, say, Dallas or Los Angeles or New York City or Tampa last year, especially, given that they had, like they almost had the WrestleMania show at the start of COVID. They WWE takes no loss if that show doesn't happen. It's the municipality that invested in this third party procuring and then presenting athletes. So that's largely what you have to understand the Olympics are. A municipality, say Sochi or Moscow or Los Angeles or wherever, calls basically like puts a bid out to the IOC and says, hey, if you could bring us the athletes, if you could bring us the games and all of the metal platforms and all the other things that you guys do, and we just build the buildings and advertise it, then we'll make a deal. That's all it is. And in this case, for Tokyo, like they're looking at it like, well, we have to have these games too, because we put out like hundreds of billions of dollars to the IOC and saying that we're going to build all this stuff and we built it. So like, and there's a fascinating thing about that too. If you look at like the city of Montreal, for instance, they held the Summer Olympic Games in 1976, and they built a baseball stadium, a stadium that became a baseball stadium. They built all of these like archery pits and things that you could never imagine having a use for in any sort of like urban location anywhere in the world. And if you go to Montreal, if you look around in Montreal, like there's a fascinating conversation about urban decay. When you look at all of those Olympic buildings, like, and this is almost 50 years later, like they're all empty and they're all like run down and decrepit because of the very situation that we're talking about. Like Montreal's like, yeah, bring all your guys, we'll build all the stuff. And yeah, this is ultimately in the post-COVID era to do something like that is mind-boggling. And even deeper, I'll finish the point by saying this. The Olympic Games are in trouble moving forward because we're going to be dealing with a simultaneous depression and recession economically in the world, probably in the next 20 years. So for the next 20 years, anybody that, like, we know who's holding the Olympics, like the next 5 to 10, but anything past that, countries thinking, okay, yeah, we're going to bring you guys in and we're going to build all this stuff, but where's the money?
Yeah.
Are you just going to like use public parks and have people do archery in public parks? Play softball at a local high school? Like,
I can't see NBC signing on to that.
And right, and they're not going to. They're going to be like, well, where's the Dowling arena? Like every city side arena, but you're not.
But then, as you said, yeah, no, the concern is that, as you said, is these kind of white elephants, and all of that, these structures that, okay, they're built, for the purposes of these games and that sort of thing. And then, 10 years, 20 years later, and all of that, these all stand decrepit. It reminds me of this kind of sort of, these, dead balls, all of that, which we're going to be starting to see more of as we start to emerge.
Yeah, it's the same thing. It's crazy. And the Olympics are the best microcosm so far of post-capitalist, post-COVID world. This place where the rules don't make sense. They don't apply to the people. They don't apply to their direct needs. They don't apply to medical innovation. They don't apply to social justice. They don't apply to cultural evolution. And they take place at a time where people cannot afford to see them on any level. And even because people can't afford to see them, and because like the laws and bylaws of which these games are being held now, there's ultimately no reason then to invest in them. So it's like, well, this is just the tail chasing the dog and the dog chasing the tail, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just a crazy cycle that ultimately has to be broken. Like people, we'll try to do the Olympics for generations, but it's going to be at a lower return of investment every single time at a precipitous rate if we continue along at this rate. And I perceive we will, and just to imagine what that could look like in probably, like I said, in 10 years is terrifying.
Because I was going to say, really, in a lot of these issues that we're talking about here now, like we're going to come up with having the Beijing Winter Olympics coming up next year.
Right. They're holding the Winter Olympics in China, which is a human rights violation waiting to happen. Like, and it's already starting there. There's already some movement with some countries looking at Beijing and not wanting to be involved, and the Chinese government's like, don't politicize sports. But you're the Chinese government, and you're the most notorious human rights violator on planet Earth. And because, again, the IOC sells the games as a sold 16-day show, anybody can put the money on the table and the IOC is going to look at it. And if you look at the world right now, if you look at economics, the Chinese are running circles around everybody. What their GDP is back to what 8.3%. Like after coronavirus, because Amazon's making literal trillions of dollars. Amazon's worth trillions of dollars, and most of their like essential like goods and most of their essential goods are made over there. So yeah, like obviously Beijing's gonna like want to invest in the games because they need something to write this money off on. Like they have too much of it. So you go into the gold mint and pull out some gold cubes and give them to the IOC and keep it moving. Crazy.
I want to talk about two stars of ESPN that have been in the news quite a bit as of late this month, Rachel Nichols and Maria Taylor. Well, we know what's been going on with the two of them, and of course, as of the time of this recording, but we're very kind of sort of early about this as to what, if anything, is going to happen to either of them or both of them. Um, I guess give me your thoughts on that situation. And
Okay. I'll make it as brief as I can make it. Reparations are hard. Like they just are. And especially in America, where we've been told to believe that Black people are second-class citizens, unless they're superhuman. And in Rachel Nichols' case, she's not like a bad person. She's just an American. And she has no way of understanding how to vocalize or verbalize or even remotely understand what reparations look like. Like you say, oh, she got it because she's Black, which is essentially true, but at the same time, that's also she's also gifted, and you have to respect the fact that this is a gifted and talented person too. So there's like it's a cross-cutting intersection of issues that I think are going to come across every single industry. I'm fascinated that it happened in the realm of sports broadcasting because sport is intriguing in the sense that it's one of the few places where Black people have essential work in America. And to have this kind of thing occur in this theater where it's easy to make the point that Rachel Nichols is all the way wrong. Like unequivocally across the board, you are wrong, the Black woman is right. And to watch that play out and to see how everybody's kind of like making a statement in regards to it, I think that there's something in this that will hopefully open up the conversations that have been likely happening in other industries behind closed doors, and will give people a sense of what it needs to look like when it's finally out in full color. Because this is not the first time, this is not the last time this is going to happen. But for it to happen in such a high-profile industry that actually values Black people and has for the perpetuity of time, I think that's important.
yeah, and I think that you had, when you think about the fact that, as you said, this is not the first time, and nor this is going to be the last. I mean, we've seen over the past few years what's happened to, Jamel Hill. You saw what happened to Paul Pierce. Um, which,
Paul and Jamel were like, this is the first time where it's like the Black person was unequivocally right. Like Jamel Hill was like on the border between right and wrong. Paul Pierce, in my opinion, was like all the way wrong. Like you're a public figure, sir. you're a public, you're also an NBA respected athlete for whom most people have no idea of your life outside of shooting three-pointers. No idea. Now we do, clearly, but at the time we had no idea. So when the public knows you for doing a certain thing, like it's like if the question mark suit man, if you're a Washington D.C. man, if the question mark suit man walked around one day with periods on his shirt, you'd be like, well, what's going on? That doesn't make sense. Something doesn't add up. But in this case, this is the first case where, without a shadow of a doubt, when you look at this as black and white, black was 100% right and white was 100% wrong. So it's something fascinating to consider.
It most certainly is going to be fascinating to see what, if anything, will be the fallout from all of this, because of course we're recording this right before we air, and Maria Taylor's contract, apparently, if we are to see from the articles, is going to expire right before this episode goes out. So it will be interesting to see what's going to happen to the both of them. It's going to be interesting to see what's going to happen this Olympics. But we're going to
That's
be
the Olympics. It's going to be something. For sure.
it's going to be, yeah, no, it's going to be wild. It's definitely going to be one for the books, regardless of what happens. I think that the historians and everybody that sees all of this, especially in this COVID era, of holding games, in this era where, again,
I hope they're filming 16 Days to Glory. It's my favorite documentary after every Olympics. Like, I hope they're filming it for this one especially, because it's going to be a compelling documentary for sure.
yeah, and I got to take a look at that. I got to take a look at that and see, about that, because I think there may be a lot of lessons learned here from this. So,
Certainly.
definitely going to be fascinating stuff. So, Marcus Dowling, journalist, media entrepreneur, and cultural creative, thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure as always. Truly appreciate you.
And thank you so much for watching. Listen, there's going to be a lot more where that came from, so you better stay tuned to catch it all. In the meantime, don't forget to follow us on all of our social media accounts for more information, including all of the bonus content that you'll see from today's show. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell on our YouTube channel so that you do not miss any of our episodes. And until next time, I'm Eugene Nova, and remember, we will not be silenced.